Do you want to take beautiful photos but usually end up with something like this instead? Or maybe you imagined this but got that? Let me help you take images you are proud of. I promise I will teach you photography in a faster, more interesting and more sustainable way than anybody else on this planet. I will make the process easy to understand, entertaining and structured. I have included some secret learning tricks so that you will retain everything you learn instead of forgetting it. Let's get right into it! The first lesson of this free photography course is about image brightness. Image brightness has 4 components. Let me start with the first one that, despite being the most important component of all, is pretty much ignored. It is scene brightness, or in other words, scene luminance. Believe it or not, this component of image brightness is the one thing in photography that creates the biggest confusion. To avoid that confusion right from the start, let me tell you a secret. Your eyes are constantly fooling you. Let me prove that. My friend Beginner Wolf is shooting our neighbor's boy Tony playing basketball outdoors. Here is the image he got. Let's now go indoors. Here we are in a regular gym where kids play basketball. Let me manually dial in the same setting the camera chose outdoors and take a shot. And this is the result. No, I'm not joking. To my eyes, it still looks bright enough in here, but my camera doesn't seem to agree with that. So who is right, my eyes or the camera? Let's measure the light. Outdoors I got a reading of 80,000 lux. In here I only get a reading of 140 lux. That's 500 times less than outdoors. So the camera is right. Our eyes just do an amazing job in presenting us constant light levels. If they showed us the real amount of light, we would be totally lost as soon as the sun sets, or we would go indoors where there obviously is no sunlight at all. I assume you're not happy with the completely black image we got. To get a usable image, you would have to change the camera settings, because your camera settings are first and foremost the reaction to the amount of light that you have available. How to change them without getting a blurry image or an image with a lot of noise is one of the most important things you will learn in this free photography course. So the first thing you learned about light, the real amount is not what you see, but the amount your camera measures. But there is another thing about light in photography that is equally important. Light is usually a given unless...
Please hold for a very important message.
Unless you have a choice. The really great images are usually taken by choice, for example by carefully planning the time, getting up early and shooting in the best possible time and direction rather than just snapping what is there. Here is another example. Beginner Wolf likes to photograph his dog at home on his couch. This, on the other hand, is Nerdy Wolf. He goes outdoors when he photographs his dog, because as we have already learned, outdoors we have a lot more light available, and that can improve your images big time. Let's compare the 2 images. I'd say the difference is massive. I will soon teach you which outdoor light is best, but for now, let's just remember that you don't have to accept just any light. You have a choice. So scene brightness is the first component of image brightness, and you can probably imagine that it is the most important one. But we have a few more components that are camera related. The second one is aperture. The aperture is a hole in the lens of our camera that is usually variable in size. Except for smartphones, they have fixed apertures. What the aperture allows us to do is block some of the light in our scene from entering the camera by making the hole smaller. The higher the number you set for the aperture, the more light is blocked. I will teach you more about aperture in the next lesson, where I will also teach you a much more exciting effect of aperture. Compare this image to that image, or this image to that image. Cool, right? So stay tuned. Before we continue with this lesson, you might be wondering, how is this course completely free? There must be a catch, right? No catch, it is really free and you can keep watching it right here on YouTube. That said, there is an important add-on I'll introduce you to in the next lesson. What is the difference, you may ask? The add-on doesn't give you more information than this YouTube course, but it helps you learn faster. Like 2 years of progress in 2 weeks kind of faster. I know that sounds wild, but that's what the Wolf Method is designed to do. If you are curious, there is a link in the description, or just hang tight, I'll tell you more in lesson 2, aperture. Alright, on we go explaining exposure. The third component of image brightness is exposure time. The exposure time determines how long the sensor that actually records the image is exposed to the light in our scene. Why does it matter whether the sensor is exposed longer or shorter? All the sensor basically does is gather light. And if you give it more time to gather, it will logically be able to collect more light. Just like 2 balls in the rain. If you expose one ball longer to the rain than the other, it will gather more water. But more on that later. And here is something important for your understanding of photography. Photographers wrongly call that setting shutter speed. Let me explain. The sensor is usually covered by a shutter which prevents it from gathering light. Only when you hit the shutter button on your camera will the so-called shutter curtain be lifted to expose the sensor. While the sensor is exposed, it can collect light. But when the exposure time you set ends, the shutter will close again and finish the process of exposure. The exposure time can vary from blazing fast 1/8000th of a second to several minutes. So the exposure time is variable. The speed at which the shutter opens or closes, however, is constant. What makes the difference is how long the shutter stays open to collect light. So when talking to other photographers, you probably have to use the word shutter speed. But for your understanding, always keep in mind that it is actually a time frame. To make your mouth water, just like aperture, shutter speed also has a creative component. Once you understand how it works, you can either freeze motion to get these images or blur motion to get these images. I promise it is super easy, more on that in lesson 3 of this course. So, we talked about 3 components of image brightness. Let's get to the 4th. Remember, once the shutter closes, exposure is over. Exposure is over, but your image brightness is not determined yet, because there is that 4th component, the gain. If for whatever reason the light the sensor gathered is not enough to create the image brightness you want, you can add some gain to make it brighter. That gain is called ISO. Raising the gain, however, comes with a downside. It creates noise. You don't want noise in your images, do you? So if you can avoid raising ISO, do it. How can you avoid raising ISO? By using the real thing, namely light, instead of artificial gain. And that brings me to something very important. Despite photographers using the term exposure a lot, there is a difference between image brightness and exposure. Exposure is about real light. So first and foremost about scene brightness. How much of that scene brightness gets through the hole, called aperture, and how long that remaining light can expose the sensor so that it can collect the light. ISO, however, is neither a part of exposure, nor is it real light, because it is added after the sensor is not exposed to light anymore. So it is not natural light, but only the gain. Raising ISO is in fact very similar to brightening your images in your editing software on your phone or your computer. And I'm sure you would agree that image editing has nothing to do with exposing your sensor to light, which is where the term exposure comes from. Don't fall for a widespread nonsense in photography, the so-called exposure triangle. It misses the by far most important component of exposure, scene luminance, but lists the gain instead,
What's happening?
which is added after the exposure already ended. That leads to a lot of confusion because beginners think photography is a magic mix of camera settings, while in reality these 3 settings are a reaction to the amount of light you have available. Whenever someone tells you to
Learn the exposure triangle,
ignore him or tell him to watch this video. To replace the exposure triangle, I have created a series of better memory aids and cheat sheets that I will introduce you to throughout this course. You can print them, hang them on your fridge, on your bathroom door, or put them in your camera bag for reference. They are free to download if you subscribe to my mailing list. I will give you a link at the end of the video. And now to the most important part of learning photography. Learning means repeating. Don't expect you will understand photography by watching this video or any other video once. That is not how learning works. You can repeat it right away, but we learn at school that repetition after 24 hours works best. And repeating again after 48 hours will store what you learned in your long-term memory. Learning is not different with photography. Set your calendar for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And here is another learning tip. Did you know that you can slow me down when I'm talking too fast? Just use YouTube's outstanding playback speed function to choose the right speed for your perfect learning experience. For example, when you learn new content, you can slow me down or watch at the regular speed. But when you repeat a lesson or refresh your knowledge, you can speed me up instead. Don't underestimate the importance of that. It will improve your learning big time. And now the link to my email list. You can find it at wolfhammer.com or click the link below the video. In the next lesson, we will start getting creative. I can't wait to see you there.